Good afternoon and good evening wherever you are in Australia. Good afternoon in Western Australia. Good evening in the East Coast and in the Northern Territories. It's just turned 5:30 where I am in Alice Springs. A little bit cheap, and I've got an unheated motel room while I'm on the road, so I've had to sort of rug up a little bit. So please excuse me for wearing a great big long coat as I'm presenting this one today. But we're taking a look at a very important topic to me personally, which is the topic of unconscious bias. It's a topic that I think that few business people like to talk about, particularly small businesses who like to think that they are, serving everybody equally, but not knowing that they're going into their business with a lot of presumptions, a lot of assumptions and stereotypes about certain groups of people that they may or may not choose to serve at some point. We're talking about overcoming unconscious bias, but first, I guess we need to understand what unconscious bias is. A little quote here from one of my favorite authors of the past 20 years. He died quite some time ago, M. Scott Peck, the author of The Road Less Traveled. Human beings are poor examiners, subject to superstition, bias, prejudice, and a profound tendency to see what they want to see rather than what is really there. Yep, I couldn't have said that better myself. What we're going to look at this afternoon and this evening is what unconscious bias is and some of the ways that that plays out in your life. We'll look at what some of the unintended consequences are on your business and the impact on clients, staff, and broader communities as well. We'll look at how it also plays out in marketing and how to check your own unconscious bias when it comes down to it. Hopefully, this will be a nice quick webinar tonight so you can get on with dinner and all those wonderful things you want to do. In the meantime, this is brought to you by Business Station and the Australian Small Business Advisory Services Digital Solutions Program, an initiative by the Australian Government in conjunction with Business Station in Western Australia, Regional Development Australia Brisbane in Queensland, and Treaty Business Consulting in the Northern Territory. A little about me. My name, Dante St. James. I work with a business called Clickstarter, which is one of my 4 businesses I now run, including a bricks and mortar business and bricks and mortar business. It's been a long day of talking today. You'll have to excuse me with that. And also a couple of e-commerce businesses that I run as well. I'm a mentor in the New Business Assistance with NICE program with my pathway in the Northern Territory. I work with Google's Digital Springboard program, Treaty Business Consulting as a digital advisor and trainer, and with Facebook and their Boost program throughout Australia. So it's definitely a gig that I'm enjoying having. And I'm getting on the road very shortly with them to Port Macquarie the next couple of weeks, and then looking in sort of mid-July at going to either Townsville or the Barossa Valley. I know, terrible to have to go to the Barossa Valley in the middle of winter and get to taste wine and all those wonderful things. Just terrible, isn't it? And my own training company, which is called DanteStJames.com. Less about me. What is unconscious bias? What exactly is this thing we're talking about tonight? What is this beast of a thing? We talk about bias as something that's quite known, but what is unconscious bias? Now, bias could just be that I prefer one team over the other when it comes to the footy. But unconscious bias is written out in the attitudes that are beyond our regular understanding of ourselves and others. So we don't necessarily know that this is something we're carrying with us. It's usually something which is reinforced by the environment, particularly the environment we grew up in, and the experiences we've had. It is the basis for a great deal of the patterns that we show around our behaviors with diversity. So when we're faced with things we don't necessarily know what they are, we don't necessarily have much experience with them, we tend to either veer away or somehow discriminate against them. Now, this may not be something that you actively know you're doing. It quite often plays out in words like, I'm not racist, but, I'm not sexist, but, I'm not homophobic, but, and then you go forward and you can almost guarantee that something is going to be racist when someone says, I'm not racist, but. It's just this like, it's almost like this pattern of behavior that's there. And this person may not truly believe or understand or even conceive that they're racist. In fact, they may be horrified if someone's to point out and say, mate, that's actually really, really super racist what you just said there. And then that may shatter their world and change their entire perception around who they are as a person and how they think. And that's the idea. And we attack unconscious bias by first of all bringing it to the light, bringing it to the fore, and showing that this thing exists, and it happens with all of us, me included, as a overweight gay man who lives in regional Australia and works with a lot of regional remote communities. There's a lot of unconscious bias even I carry with me that I need to check myself as I'm going about my daily life to make sure that attitudes are with me from where I grew up, or the experience I might have had, or the jobs I may have had, or the way I've been treated at various times in my life will be those things that I might have to check that they're not driving my behavior moving forward with people. And when it comes down to it, this thing called unconscious bias is actually really bad for business. Unconscious bias can be something as innocent and as seemingly, not really a massive problem as saying something like money can't buy happiness. But the answer to that is, well, how would you know unless you've had money to begin with? And this could come from an unconscious bias towards the fact that I grew up without much money. I had to make do with all the things I had. I think that I'm pretty happy. Therefore, money can't buy happiness because I didn't grow up with money and I'm happy. Therefore, money can't buy happiness. And I don't need to answer the question that, well, how would I know? Because, well, I know that because I'm happy and I don't know money. So, therefore, money doesn't bring happiness. That's in the most innocuous, easy, simple way of understanding unconscious bias. But then it could be something a lot more noxious, such as, oh no, a car accident. Oh yeah, I bet it was an Asian woman. That kind of statement is absolutely reflective of unconscious bias. Whether it was thought or spoken out loud, it's one of those things that may have come from the background of, well, a friend of mine had a car accident and it's the only car accident I knew someone in. So, and the other driver was an Asian woman, therefore, Asian women cause car accidents. And this is one of those things where it's not necessarily born from a place of racism, it's born from a place of an experience. And it actually expresses itself in an incredibly racist way. So attitudes like these, stereotypes like these, little throwaway lines like these are symptoms of a much broader idea, and we call that unconscious bias. It's not even realizing that you have this attitude towards an entire chunk of human society. Like, there's more Asian people on this planet than any other kind of person, and women about half of those. So you're saying that a massive chunk of the world's population cause car accidents or bad drivers. When you say it like that, it actually kind of seems completely ridiculous, considering there's probably about 1 billion women who are Asian who are in this planet who drive vehicles or ride bicycles or do something in the world of traffic. Yet an attitude has come across that because a friend of mine had a car accident, they're the only person I've ever knew who's Asian. Therefore, all Asian women must cause car accidents. Pretty illuminating when you think of it in those terms. Now, some of the lighter areas of where we might tend to have an unconscious bias is where we kind of call it birds of a feather flock together. So it's, oh, we all love red wine, so we all like to hang together. Oh, we all barrack for Collingwood. We're all Michael Bublé fans. We're a group of fellow vegans. But then underneath the gathering together of almost any group is a level of exclusivity. We all love red wine, but we can't stand people who like white wine. We all barrack for Collingwood. We can't stand people who support Carlton. We're all Michael Bublé fans, and we can't stand Harry Connick Jr. We're a group of fellow friendly vegans, but if you eat meat, you're not welcome here. So there tends to be where birds of a feather flock together. There's an undercurrent of exclusion or an undercurrent of, well, this is the wonderful thing that brings us together. But there's also, it also is designed to drive others away from us. We find like-minded people, and that therefore makes us feel great. They're around like-minded people, but then we tend to then exclude people who are not of a like mind. And in some cases, when it comes to some religious groups, and certainly not all, but some religious groups, some lifestyle groups, some fashion groups, some other kinds of groups of people who have a certain physical attribute in common, then it becomes quite noxious when it's not just about them coming together because of something in common. They come together to exclude people who don't have that thing in common with them. A little bit more noxious and a little bit more heavy would be the it's how I was brought up. In our household, we didn't like gay people. In our household, we didn't talk to those people. In our household, we don't go to that pub because that's where the other people go. We don't go there. In our household, we learned that you can't trust rich people because rich people ran the company my dad worked for and he got fired one day. So these attitudes and these unconscious biases that come around are not always caused by someone just being a bad person. Quite often, there's just something that you grew up with, and it's really hard to overcome. If I said I grew up basically learning that people from an Italian background were called spaghettis, and people from Chinese backgrounds were called a word that I don't even want to describe because I think it's kind of disgusting, but that was very commonplace in my household when we were growing up. I use that as okay, well, that's the way I grew up, that's the way we describe people, so that's what I think. But when you bring that point to bear and you go, well, that's not acceptable in the world that I live in. That's not acceptable in the world that I work with. I work with a ton of people, so it's not appropriate for me to call an Italian friend a spaghetti. It's not appropriate for me to call someone from a Greek community another word which was used for a lot of people who were Greek in the 1980s when I tended to grow up and learn all these behaviors. And then I look at people like others who I grew up with who still carry a lot of those attitudes. I grew up in a very white, Protestant, Anglo area of Sydney, and in that area, we always referred to it as God's country. And when we crossed the bridge into another part of Sydney, it was like going to another world because there were so many people from different backgrounds and different cultures and religions and ethnicities that it was like, no, don't cross the Tom Ugley's Bridge because you're going to go to, and look, another word that I'm not even going to repeat because it's disgusting, but we're going to a place where we don't belong. That's where they belong. And so that environment fosters an area, fosters an attitude, I suppose, of a bias towards the things that are familiar, the things that are safe, the things that you recognize, the foods you grew up with, the the television shows you grew up with. The faces on the television shows looking like yours are the ones you're more likely to watch. You're going to more likely want to watch Neighbours because the people look like you rather than watching Good Times because those people didn't look like you. And then a far more obvious that comes across to a very open and almost honest and almost proud to be. It's an honest bias. It's a bias that just expresses itself and doesn't care. And that's where you're saying we don't hire Muslims. You don't hire a boy to do a man's job, or even worse, you don't hire a woman to do a man's job. I don't want any women in this job. I don't want any men in this job. She's too young for this. He's too old for that. The exclusions, which are very, very spoken out because the person speaking them thinks they're actually real. This is not unconscious bias. It may have started as unconscious bias, not understanding how what Muslim people are, not understanding that women can do just about any job that a man can do, and men can do many jobs that women can do as well. Age groups are capable of doing a lot of great jobs as well. But the attitude started off maybe that, well, I only grew up with men's teachers in men's schools and female teachers in women's and girls' schools. And so therefore, we don't, it doesn't feel right to have a male teacher in a girls' school. But the world has changed. Things are that just a little bit different. Things are completely different to what they were maybe 50 or 60 years ago. It's going to make this work. There we go. So, how all this then can play out in business ultimately depends upon you, but it plays out in some very insidious ways. It can play out in a way that says, well, sorry, but that person's not on brand. And I'll bring forward a personal story here. I was actually a work group of people who are largely young, professional, very beautiful, highly dressed, very groomed, and very, I'll just say it, they're very white. Any of their events they hold, any of their parties they hold, they're just about all white. It's literally spot someone who's not completely white. It's like going to a young liberals meeting. It's just it was so completely geared towards a specific type of person and they would call themselves, well, they're setting a standard. We have a very specific standard of our events. And I can be a bit scruffy, got grey in the beard. I've got a pot belly. I don't necessarily wear fashion designer clothing, and I don't intend wearing fashion designer clothing. But they didn't originally. They originally booked me in because I am the best at what I do in this particular case of what they were booking me for. I'm the most certified, the most experienced, and most certainly the most qualified to bring in there. And I just happen to be living in their town. However, the I was cancelled a week out, just saying that, oh yeah, we're not going to go ahead with the event anymore because reasons. Because oh, I'm feeling tired. I don't feel like I've got any energy to be able to run this. I need to sort of step back and take a break. They're like, yeah, no worries. No harm, no foul. And I find out following that weekend when I was meant to do this event, that they did do the event with someone else who was younger and beautiful and wore high heels and had a tight dress and was very white and very groomed and very and much than I was. Now, I wasn't on brand. I kind of get that, and that's okay for me. But then I look at how many other people could have missed out on that opportunity because they weren't on brand, because maybe their dresses weren't quite as nice. Maybe they just didn't really reflect the color of skin of the people in the room. Perhaps there was a very good chance that that person could have been a bit more overweight than they would like in that crowd. I just simply wasn't on brand. Now, is this an unconscious bias? Well, they would say that they have a certain brand that they like to fulfill, a certain look that they like to have, a certain standard and level of detail that they like to have in their events, and that I don't really match that. So why ask me in the first place and then lie to me about it? Now, it didn't hurt me at all. In fact, it freed me up for another event that weekend, which I was going to have to cancel being at. So all worked well for me. But not everybody is in a position where they've got as thick a skin as I do and are able to take that. Some other people will look at that and just thought, oh my God, eating disorder on the way because I'm obviously too fat for them. It could also be that there's not the right look. So when it plays out in business, it's like, oh, she's not really the right look to have at our bar. She's not really the right look to be serving in our restaurant. Oh, look, she's not really the right look for a beauty salon because, her look is a bit gothic and she's not really what there is. And we have this unconscious bias towards a certain look that people should be when they are hospitality workers, a certain look even when people should be a teacher, a certain look that comes across when someone should be working in a service industry. And those biases are not based on the ability of that person to do the job. They're based upon what a preconception is of the kind of person who has done that job. We've seen it before. Therefore, they must be the only kind of person who can do that kind of job. And that creates then a bias that we act on, and we start hiring people based upon their looks, hiring people based upon things like cultural fit, which will come across very soon. It's just had a track record that showed that he was able to do it. He was very reliable in the work he'd done before. His positioning and his presentation for the work he did was spot on. But when we put it in front of a regional manager who he'd also have to work with, she was straight away, no, not a good cultural fit. I don't think he's going to fit in. He's not going to be good for people to work with here. And at the time, I didn't speak up because that's not what we did. And I really regret that because I think the decision was made upon a racial ground because the guy was from the Middle East and he was a Muslim. Now, we went on to hire someone in the end who was a local white girl who would have more of a cultural fit to the organization. Now, that's without knowing further along down the track that she would actually cause more problems than she'd solve, and that the guy, thankfully, that we did not hire because of those wrong reasons, has gone on to have a fantastic career. And the best thing we could have done really is not brought him to that horrible organization where he would not have been valued or nurtured in any way. But I did get the opportunity quite a lot of years later on LinkedIn. Reach out to her and say hi. You might remember with you with some other people. I just want to say, look, um, I want to accept the responsibility for not speaking out, and the reason you're not being hired was because of your cultural background, and that was incredibly unforgivable of me to be part of that decision being made and not speaking out against it. And like you said, look, you get used to it. You just know that when someone says, "Hey, we chose someone else," it's usually not because of merit. It's usually because of the way you look and the culture you come from. So he said, like, I really appreciate you reaching out, but seriously, mate, this happens all the time. It's just part and parcel of not being part of the majority. Sadly, this is how it plays out in businesses. Another story is a young woman who has cerebral palsy, who was going out to a pub, and this was in, I believe, Townsville. And she was going out to a pub in Townsville with her friends. And as she stepped up, she was a little bit, not severely disabled, but certainly was noticeably not walking like everyone else. The assumption with the security guard at the front of that pub was that she was drunk and refused to let her in. Her friends were allowed in. She was not allowed in. She was told to come back in an hour when she was less drunk. Now, the girls then tried to explain that no, she has cerebral palsy. This is not drunk. She's actually got a disability. This is why she's walking the way she is. And the security guard, obviously, being caught out and panicking, has just said, no, 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 come back in an hour. And so all the girls walked out, and then a discrimination complaint was brought against that particular pub, and that pub was then heavily fined for what happened there. It was definitely a very strong case of looking at someone based upon a first glance and then doubling down based on an assumption because you got caught out and going, well, okay, I've been caught out. I made a really, really discriminatory decision here. So what I'm going to do is double down on that and not apologize and not back down, because that would be looked at as weakness. Because of another unconscious bias is that people who change their mind are somehow weak when they're presented with new information. So these stories come out in businesses again and again and again. In a job that I was in many, like back in the 90s, there was a particular, like a brainstorming days where we get together and we would use butcher paper and whiteboards and brainstorm ideas on how to become better at what we did in this particular company, in these particular roles. And so it was all levels of this particular company, upper management, the everyday people, assistants, executive assistants, receptionists, even at one stage, I believe the person who used to do the coffee runnings, or we used to call her the gopher, because you'd go for coffee. That was kind of her job, was the runaround person who would help everyone else to get their jobs done. So all these people were invited into this day, and the idea was to come up with brand new ideas for increasing our revenue. Now, this particular woman, she was in her 50s at the time and was one of the assistants to one of the managers who was in this particular group. And as we were going around looking at decisions and looking at the ideas of how to find new revenue for the business, she came up with what I thought was a brilliant idea. And I won't go into what the idea was because it gives away who the company was. But she got this idea and was immediately shot down and said, look, I don't think you really would know what you're talking about. You're only an assistant. And so the unconscious bias that came up there was that, number one, she was a woman, so she wouldn't have any sort of idea of what she was talking about in this particular realm. And also because of her job as an assistant, that she really wouldn't have any good ideas to share. Now, thankfully at the time, that guy was completely shot down. It was like, dude, who do you think you are? Like, this is the whole idea. We've got people in here to get diversity of opinions, so we'd actually get some new ideas into place instead of being stuck on the ideas we've been doing for the last 15 years. But that unconscious bias that crept in with this guy was that, well, in her position, she's not really someone who's going to be an ideas person. So therefore, we're not going to really listen to her because she's just a dumb assistant. And then a hiring decision made in another business, literally in the last 2 weeks in Darwin, was I overheard a conversation at a restaurant where a particular manager who was out with Friday drinks with her colleagues and was talking about the new guy she'd hired to the department that she works in. And she quite literally said, I chose him because he was cuter than the other guys. And I'm thinking, this does not seem right at all. So I was listening into this conversation. I was like, even got my friends who were sitting with say, hey, listen to this, listen to what's going on over here. And it was this discussion and this conversation was all based upon the fact that one of the applicants for this particular role was an Indigenous man. Another applicant was an Indian man. This guy was the particular person they chose was a guy who just long moved up from Melbourne and was sharp dressing, good looking, and it had a bit of a swagger about him, and he'd be what anyone would think is a hot guy, right? So for her to call out, she actually said in the conversation we overheard that the Indian guy, or the curry as she called him, the curry had a way better resume and knew so much more about what we're doing. But let's face it, we want the cute guy around because you might as well go to work and get to look at a good view. I was like, whoa, that doesn't seem quite right. And then I realized I was basically overhearing a conversation that every woman has had to hear in her career from men who are doing hiring of women for the last 50, 60 years. And how it hit home when I heard this referred back to a man in the same way, the objectification of someone. So it happens. This happens in businesses right now. And this was not a very big business. This was a relatively medium-sized business. And this actually happened. Then there's the other stories where, oh, she's just so much hard work because she's in a wheelchair. We're not really geared for someone in a wheelchair. And the unconscious bias that comes here is that people who are disabled are too much hard work without actually realizing that people who work who have mobility issues and are in wheelchairs have learned to make their way around the world pretty impressively. They are able to fit into spaces where you think, oh, that's not really made for wheelchairs, and they make it work. They are very, very resourceful, impressive people who are able to do all these things really well. So we look at this and we go, well, you know what? We've got to go, what was it that made us decide that we can't hire someone who's in a wheelchair because of an unconscious bias that they are too much hard work? Where did we get that idea from? And if we look down further, we'll go, well, actually, I've never worked with someone with a wheelchair before. How would I know that they're too much work? Am I making an assumption here based upon a stereotype that people in wheelchairs are not mobile and can't get around? I now work with a woman in a wheelchair. And I tell you what she's able to achieve and the energy that she's got to achieve it with is absolutely impressive. And by no means has much had to change about that workplace to accommodate her. Yes, we may have had to take up a disabled car parking spot. Naturally, that's probably the least that we could do. But we also found there wasn't much change that had to happen to the workplace. She wasn't too much hard work. She works hard. She works her butt off to get all this stuff done because all her life she's had to prove to other people that she has to do more than the average person to be able to shine through before people start not seeing her disability and start seeing her amazing work. So it plays out in areas of employment. We tend to lean towards people we relate to. We tend to be attracted to what we consider to be familiar and safe. It's almost like an evolutionary construct in our lives that we look for the easiest path forward, the smoothest path forward, the path of least resistance. We try to find a good fit with everyone else. We hire based on who we already have in place rather than on the merit of the person coming in. We call this cultural fit. We call this a workplace fit or a team fit. But the reality is it's more so about, are they going to fit in based upon a bunch of very surface-oriented judgments we can make about that person? Will they mix with the rest of the guys here because she's a girl? Maybe not. The guys will feel like they're not able to be themselves. If they've got a girl around, they're going to have to watch what they say. Those kind of unconscious biases, those kinds of assumptions we make about not only the people who we're working with, but the people who we hire to bring in to work with them. It plays out in business, this unconscious bias, as how we handle ideas. We tend to want ideas from the people who have the biggest runs on the board. They've been around the longest. They are our senior staff. They tend to know how things work around here. And then we make decisions based upon a majority. Now, if our majority has very little diversity in it, if it's all guys, all girls, all white, all one particular background, then we're hobbling ourselves into decisions that are made by a majority of people who are the same, who may not even reflect who our audience is or who our customers are. We tend to avoid the person with ideas from other cultures because, oh, they just wouldn't understand how we do things around here. They just wouldn't have an understanding of the kind of customers we're dealing with here. We assume that people can only get ideas based upon their own experience and background. So Ahmed from Jordan can only think of ideas and new things based upon the fact that he was a migrant from Jordan and can only think like a migrant from Jordan. We don't realize he actually spent his entire university years being educated at Oxford University in the UK, where he had an exposure to a multicultural group of people, to people of very high socioeconomic standards, from very rich people to people who are very, very intelligent. But we assume, oh no, Ahmed's from Jordan, so therefore, what would he know about fish and chips, and the kind of people that we have around here? He wouldn't know what all that means. So we're ignoring the fact that, wait, Ahmed may not just be Ahmed from Jordan, but he's also Ahmed from Oxford University. He's also Ahmed from Tullamarine in Melbourne. He's also Ahmed who's worked in 3 Fortune 500 companies in these past few years. We just see Ahmed as a guy with a nationality and a skin tone rather than all the things that Ahmed may have gone through in his life. It plays out in the way that we stock our products. Oh, sorry, we don't stock any darker tones of this foundation because, we don't sell enough of those darker tones to really justify having it in stock. Sorry, we don't have any vegan options because we don't really get that many vegans coming into this restaurant anyway. Oh, sorry, we only sell up to size 12 in here. Sorry, we only have a bride and groom cake toppers. We don't have bride and groom and groom. Sorry, we only stock up to size extra large. Something I strike all the time because I'm a big guy. So when I go into places like Cotton On, they don't sell my size. They don't sell anywhere near my size. They sell up to XL, and under protest, they may sell, a 2XL. Most places are like that. Even online, where you go and they're only going to sell up to maybe a 2XL. 3XL if maybe it's an American t-shirt place, but after you get from there, there's not a lot of options available to you. I'm above that. So, as a bigger guy, I find that just like larger women who cannot find their size in regular stores and have to go to special plus size boutiques, I feel your pain. I understand exactly what you're going through. And I guess not only the shame you feel when you go into a shop that doesn't stock your size, but also the joy you feel when you go to a shop that does stock your size. It certainly feels like a life-changing thing. When I walked into my first Johnny Big store in a shopping center, I tell you what, my smile was from ear to ear because I finally found clothes that looked good and felt nice. Ah, it was such a relief, really it was. So understanding that these things may be practical business decisions because we don't stock darker tones, we don't sell enough of them. When you don't stock darker tones and you have someone walking in for a darker tone, you say you don't stock them, you're immediately, well, what do you only, I bet you don't, you stock all the lighter tones, right? Oh yeah, of course we sell lots of those. So the undercurrent there is that there's an implicit bias or a unconscious bias that because we sell less of those skin tones, we shouldn't sell them. But what we're actually doing is putting a message out there that we don't serve you if you're a certain skin tone. We don't serve you if you're if you are a certain size. We don't serve you if you have specific dietary requirements, and we don't serve you if you don't fit into our typical wedding feature of bride and groom only. When it comes to work allocation, we find that we tend to have an unconscious bias that creeps in there as well. Statements such as, Dave, you go call the client, Susan, can you go and get the coffees? Is an unconscious bias perhaps in this situation that Dave is more appropriate to be calling the clients because he's a guy and he's got authority. Susan, who is in an equal job as what Dave is going to get the coffees because women are good at getting coffees. I don't know. These are kind of things that just play into everyday life still in 2021. And you just look there and you think, when will this possibly end? And like I'm a white guy, like I shouldn't have nothing to complain about. But honestly, you see this stuff going on, and if it doesn't get called out as what it is, which is bias, unconscious or explicit, then it just keeps happening. Oh, the client loves Megan, so make sure she dresses up for the occasion, which is basically saying the client loves Megan, make sure the skirt's short and the top's low cut because the client loves Megan. Jin Yang can do the coding because he's Asian and obviously really enjoys doing coding. Sean, you're not Asian, so how about you do the report? So you write it in such a way that people are going to understand it, because Jin Yang couldn't possibly write the report because he's Chinese. Michelle costs too much to do this job, and we need to do a lot of overtime this week. So let's give more of that load to Ethan because he's still a junior. So the unconscious bias we've got for Jin Yang is that Jin Yang can't do reporting because he's Chinese, but he can do coding because he's Chinese. Sean can do the reporting. The unconscious bias there is because he's an Aussie and because he grew up speaking English, that he'll be able to write reports that are far more eloquent in some way. So you can see how all this creeps into everyday life. It is insidious. 80% of the examples I've given are actually things that I've been part of or things I've heard in various workplaces I've worked in. This stuff happens every day. So there's going to be consequences for it, obviously. If you're going to behave like this in a small business, there are going to be consequences. And some of those consequences play out as having a lack of new ideas, the same boring ideas over and over and over and over again, where you start to become that company, that the particular provider who's just boring. Familiarity, after all, breeds contempt when it happens over and over and over again. And your competitors start to beat you to all the new ideas. They start to beat you to the trends. In fact, you're so undiverse in the decisions you're getting and the echo chamber of people that you're getting to speak with you that you actually miss the trends because you've never heard of them. In fact, you're so separated from other people in other areas of society, whether they're different age groups or whether they're different ethnicities or different lifestyles to yours, that you completely miss something which was a massive trend because it didn't fit into your Sky News watching schedule, or perhaps didn't come up during the chase on Channel 7 before the news. This is the danger of a lack of diversity and a lack of new ideas. This is the danger of the unconscious bias that creeps into every decision we tend to make. And look, I'm not saying that unconscious bias is unnatural and it's just a terrible thing that can't be overcome, because it can be. I have unconscious bias and I have to call myself on it all the time. In fact, 3 years ago, my whole point of that year was to heal my relationship with women, because I had so many unconscious biases crawl into my life that I developed such a toxic misogyny that I had attitudes about women that somebody, actually a friend, a male friend, actually had the sense to call me out on it. And when he called me out on it, I was like horrified. I thought, what? I'm sexist? I'm a misogynist? No way. I'm a gay guy. That's the last thing we are. Turns out maybe I was wrong with that. And so I had to set about actually making an effort, going through a level of counseling, becoming conscious of my unconscious biases, because it was making me stuck of being only able to work with other men. I couldn't work with women. 2 years later, 3 years later now, 60% of my clients are women. And I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud that I was able to overcome that, not only because it just makes it easier to work with women, but because it makes me a damn better person. Not being able to service emerging markets is another area that unconscious biases can tend to impinge your ability to make good money in a business with. If you've got more uni students living locally and you don't really notice that because you're only really serving established white tradies who drop in their white utes and they buy things on their on their particular special days of serving pies and sausage rolls and chicken and salad rolls and ice break iced coffees and cans of Coca-Cola out the back of the tradie van, well, then you're going to miss out on the fact that there's a whole lot more people who are buying different foods now in that area. They're wanting to buy more ramen, they're wanting to buy more curries, they're wanting to buy more exotic foods from the places where these students may actually come from. If you're not able to service these emerging markets because you haven't really noticed it because you're so busy serving pies and sausage rolls, then you might miss out on the fact that that's the new big revenue opportunity you've got. Not understanding that there's a growing Indian population in your area is also not understanding that the shopping habits and the social habits of your area are going to change. And if you're not able to service that changing population, then you'll find you're left behind very quickly by those who are able to do it. So, not addressing any sort of unconscious biases you have, not addressing any unwillingness to deal with other cultures and other kinds of people is terrible for business. You miss out on those trends. You miss out on the fact that new young families are starting to come in on Saturdays, and you're not creating an area where they can put the kids into a play area, or you're not providing kids meals that allow you to be able to capitalize on that. Someone else is going to do it. If you don't want to serve kids meals at half price, then wait for the people down the road to do it, and they'll steal all of your clientele. And at the very worst end, when the unconscious biases are driving the decisions you're making about your business, you get a reputation for being discriminatory. And that's not a place you want to be. You do not want to be on the wrong side of history on these things. And secondly, you don't even want to be known even the slightest for this kind of thing because it doesn't help you to win. You're not going to win if it's clear to people that you don't like black people in your place, if you have an attitude to them. I was in a McDonald's restaurant in Brisbane. It would have been, gosh, when was I was back there? It would have been, what's today? Today's Tuesday. So it would have been Thursday last week. Saturday. It was actually Saturday. Sorry, I'm trying to get my calendar right. I was in Saturday. And McDonald's works a lot with Uber Eats now, and as you probably noticed, there's a lot of Uber Eats drivers are from particular cultures, and they tend to be very heavily from South Asian cultures. So when a customer would come up, and I noticed I was watching her really carefully with this person behind the counter, she was being very, very friendly with customers who tended to be white and family people, and women and good-looking men, mind you. She would be very, very friendly too. And then when one of the Uber Eats drivers would walk up to pick up the meal that they were going to deliver, she'd give a very awkward scowl look on her face. Now, I don't believe she was very conscious of this at all. I don't think she was sitting there literally saying, ew. I think it's just that she's got so used to being around certain people of a certain culture that when something she doesn't know came up, she had this scowl on her face. And I wanted to call her on it, but instead, at the time, it just felt like there was a lot of people in that restaurant and I was just going to cause a scene. So what I've done is actually sent an email to the restaurant to say, look, this is something just watch. I noticed that the Uber Eats drivers were being treated very, very differently to other customers in the restaurant who weren't from an Indian, Pakistani, or Bangladeshi background. So I think that's something you just may need to watch before it becomes a problem. Like I said, she probably doesn't realize she's doing it. She looks like she's all of about 19 years old. So she probably hasn't had a great deal of exposure to a lot of different cultures in the world. But that's not something that that restaurant wants to be known for as the place where they don't like people from certain backgrounds because they get treated poorly. Things like, you don't want to be known as the restaurant that people don't go to because you're sexist. I'm not going there. Oh, they're sexist. They treat women terribly. They treat women like stage props. I'm out. I'm not going there at all. Or that place that you're not going to go to that cake shop to get that cake made because they treated my lesbian friends like crap. So therefore they must be just homophobes. So those kind of things that creep in that say like, oh, lesbian wedding cake, ew, and that it bleeds across to your face. So you've got that idea going on your head, it comes out through your face. People know when you think they know when you think they're disgusting. It's not hard to see that you're disgusted by someone or made to feel uncomfortable by someone. So, do you want to be that business as known as that? Probably not. So unconscious biases need to be addressed so you're not the business that gets known for that. Then there's the problem of shrinking revenue. Now, this is a very real thing because when you're looking at shrinking revenue, you're looking at yourself going out of business. Now, for a changing population becoming far more South Asian in your area, if you stocked a few more spices, you'd probably get a few more people in buying a few more things from you. But instead, if you're going, oh, I don't want to be serving those, but I don't want them coming in here. No, that's not the kind of people I want in here. Then you miss out on the changing population, your business shrivels. If you won't sell gluten-free stuff, you're missing out on the buying patterns of people who buy gluten-free stuff. Because I tell you what, people who buy gluten-free bread don't just buy gluten-free bread. They buy other things too. So if you're able to service these new markets with these new ideas, rather than having an attitude about, oh, these people faking their glutens and their celiac diseases and all this, oh, it's crap, it's all crap, then you miss out on getting the revenue that those people bring in. And I can tell you now, people who are willing to spend a whole lot more on getting a bread that's not going to make their guts swell up and cause them a great deal of abdominal pain and discomfort are a lot more willing to spend a lot of money on other stuff too. We'd be stupid not to take advantage of that. So you want to make sure that when you've got that whole shrinking revenue thing going on, that it's not because you just refusing to serve people something that they want from out of your comfort zone. That would be an unconscious bias. That will be something which you don't realize you're doing it for those reasons. And then I'd have to question that. I have to go, well, is this serving my business well? It might be serving my attitudes well. It might be serving my idea that I'm somehow superior to other people well, but it's not serving my business, even in the slightest at all. Then we see this kind of stuff creeping into marketing. And I see this so much with coaching services where it's like, oh, I only want to work with, you know, women who know their power and know their worth and are ready to take on the world. And you start to see that it's a particular style of women that they're looking for because all the photos they have of all the workshops they're hosting are all pretty much women who look like the person who's the coach. You see this so often. And then you see it with the same thing with men who are in coaching positions. They're like looking for alpha males, the next alpha, the next power guy, the prince, the king, the lion, the bear, all those very like strong alpha kind of words. And then you look around the room and you go, yeah, they're all 32-year-old white guys who are all aggressive and wanting to be alpha males and to drive Ferraris and Lamborghinis and they want to be seen as the big shot, and you can see they're all the same kind of people. There's attitudes that come across and say, well, as you can see on their website, their clothes are really only made for white girls. They don't really make stuff for things like me. Pretty sure they don't sell stuff for bigger guys. Like I was saying about Cotton On. I can't go into Cotton On because they don't have anything my size. Now, I haven't been in there for 3 or 4 years. They may have something my size now. I doubt it, but I wouldn't know because they didn't serve me at a time when I needed them. So therefore, I've never gone back to them. In fact, I just tell people straight away, don't bother going there if you're anything bigger than just a standard small, medium, or large, because you kind of just get the leftovers. Well, on their social media, it looks like a total sausage fest. Too many guys around there. They obviously don't deal with women. That pub's not for women. It's only really for old drunk guys. So let's not bother going there because it's all, the only girls on this pub website are the ones who are in bikinis riding the mechanical bull. And their ads only show guys, or their ads only show girls. When we creep in that unconscious bias to our marketing, we've got to remember that what we're saying in a very strong voice is the people in this ad, the people in these posts, the people on this website, they're the kind of people we're after. That's who we believe is our target audience. So even I have to watch that and look at changing the photos on my websites quite often to make sure that it's not sending a message that that's the only kind of person I'm after. It's not sending a message saying, I only want to work with white women. It's not sending a message saying, I only want to work with guys who drive really nice cars because I've got an unconscious bias towards them because they seem to be the people who have their crap together, right? Marketing is a place where unconscious bias has a field day. It's where we go, well, this is my brand, this is my look, these are the kind of people, these are my tribe. And we quite often use those words. And again, it's just like when we're hiring people, cultural fit. My tribe is men of the age 25 to 55 who I believe I've got something really, really relevant to say to, and I can hoodwink them into buying my stuff. Or my tribe is mums just like me because, we've got power, we're taking back power, and we're doing this amazing work, and we're coming together, and we're working with the divine feminine. And then we look at it and there's nothing divine feminine about it. It's just a group of people who look like the coach themselves. And funnily enough, that tends to be who they work with, who they attract to themselves. It's insidious, isn't it? So what are the impacts on staff? What are the impacts on clients? What are the impacts on communities in general of unconscious bias? Unconscious bias is the thing that caused no black woman to be on television unless she was a maid. And I think this was something which was, I'm trying to remember who the woman was, but she was a movie star and she was alive and watching TV in the years when the first Star Trek series came on TV. And I remember her saying, quick, mama, there's a black woman on the TV and she ain't a maid. She was talking about the amazing Nichelle Nichols playing Lieutenant Uhura in Star Trek back in 1966. And That's not that long ago. Nichelle Nichols is still alive today, and she's a magnificent woman, a singer, a dancer, a performer, a poet, a songwriter, an actress. And she was the first black woman on TV to not be placed in the role of a maid or someone who was somehow subservient to many other people. Now, of course, Star Trek was known for being many other misogynistic missteps, like women in mini skirts on a starship, which would be totally impractical for working on a starship. But it's okay. They still cut a lot of areas. For instance, having a woman on the bridge of a starship at all was so revolutionary that having Lieutenant Uhura on there, and not just a woman, but a black woman in the 1960s, was absolutely changing. These impacts happen on communities. So when we turn around and don't use the same implied or unconscious biases in our advertising, in the choices we make, in the people we hire, in the things that we promote, we can change the way that people think. One little girl was so impressed by Uhura being on there as being the first black woman to not be a maid on television. She went on to become an actress herself. And I wish I could remember who it was. And I have a feeling it might have been Oprah, but I'm not 100% sure. So the effects on staff with unconscious bias, we saw how hiring practices can be highly influenced by this. If you're only hiring people of a certain background, only hiring people of a certain nationality, only hiring people of a certain gender, then the people who are already in your workforce who are not that gender that gets hired, that background that gets hired, that culture that gets hired, that race that gets hired, then what are they thinking? Are they then to assume that they are also a second class citizen? Because if I'm the only Chinese guy in this warehouse, therefore Chinese must be viewed upon by this company as bad, because there's a lot of Chinese people who can work in this warehouse who are really good at logistics, but they're getting overseen because there's someone here who's not Chinese who got chosen above them. So the effects on staff can be very insidious as well. When we bring forward that unconscious bias, when we bring forward those underlying attitudes that drive our behavior to do things that we just do because we think they're the right way to do things, or that's just the default way we've always done it, then the impact on those who don't fit that very narrow worldview then is quite detrimental. And you find that you have high turnover of staff in those kind of workplaces. You have a lot of people coming in and going out very quickly of a particular of the non-majority nationality, or the non-majority gender, or the non-majority lifestyle expression, that then get, so I guess they look at it and go, well, I'm never going to win. I'm never going to get forward here. I'm never going to climb the ladder. I'm never going to be able to get out of this dead end job and do better in this company, because look, everyone up there, they're all middle-aged white men. Everyone up in the C-suites, in the management suites, are all middle-aged white men. So what's the point of me hanging around here? I know that I'm not the type that's ever going to make it anywhere. The effects on clients are that when a client looks at your advertising and they don't see themselves reflected in that, if they don't see the way they think reflected in the way that you write, if they don't see the models reflected in them as well, they cannot see themselves pictured there, they will not become clients. They will not become people who will want to work with you because they think that you do not serve them. Or they assume that because you have gone to no effort to include people like them in your modeling, in your stock photography, in the wording that you use on your websites, then they just assume, well, they don't really want me as a client. I'm just someone different to them. This is not going to work out. And the effect on communities is that if you don't include some kind of diversity on there, and this is not about tokens and quotas and making sure, oh yes, well that's the diversity picture we had to have on our website. It's about just making a decision to include, not making a decision just because it's a simple one, because oh, that's the easy one. Unfortunately, when you use things like Canva, it's actually not that easy to find a good, strong diversity. If you type in the words handsome man, or you type in the word beautiful woman into Canva's search engine for their stock photography, like 90% of the photos that come up are going to be white men, white women. And it's quite embarrassing, really, when you look at that. Like, that's just such an obvious unconscious bias that an algorithm has been written, even in Canva, a woman owned, a woman led, and a woman founded business would still not quite be there. It's still got an unconscious bias in its algorithm. So that's when we start to see the effects on communities going, well, if beauty is only measured in white women, if handsomeness is only measured in white men, and I'm a black girl, then where do I fit in? Do I fit in at all? Does that actually mean that I'm ugly? Does that mean I'm ugly, mum? And that's when we have serious conversations happening in living rooms of people of color, the living rooms of LGBTQIA plus community members, in the living rooms of people who speak English as a second language, and in the living rooms of people who just don't seem to fit into what the majority is in that workplace or in that business or in that community. People say that business shouldn't be able to make any decisions on policy in this world because it's only in it for itself. But I don't believe that anyone on this call tonight actually got into business just for themselves. They got into business because they believed in something. I got into business because I believed in something. I hope that's you too. And if that's something you got into business with, was to have some sort of positive impact on the world, was to change your life in a way that you could then pass on your abundance to others. And I hope that's the truth, because that's the kind of thing that can change unconscious biases. And as far along the road as we get, as as diverse and as friendly and as open and as free thinking and laterally thinking as we become, we still have unconscious biases that we grew up with. We've still got assumptions that we play out in our heads. So the question isn't of trying to make ourselves not have them, it's actually just bringing them into the light. So, what do we then need to ask ourselves? What do we need to do to check ourselves to make sure that we're making the right decisions, not based upon a bias, but upon real mindfulness? And that's about being mindful about the choices we're making. Why do I choose that person? Be aware of why you chose what you chose. Be aware of who you chose. Ask, did I choose based upon the merit of that person or the merit of that background? Or did I just choose what was easy and familiar? Ask, did I choose this person or this way forward or this particular piece of stock photography for my website or for my Canva because it's the easier path? Did I choose this picture because honestly I think this woman looks more beautiful or this guy looks hotter because that's what you personally find more attractive? Ask, did I just choose the easier path? What impact will this choice that I'm making right now have beyond just myself? And ask yourself, is this actually a good business decision, or am I just making an automatic choice here based upon the choices I've made in the past? Becoming a bit more mindful about the choices you're making. Mindfulness isn't just about coloring in books. Mindfulness is about being actively involved in the decisions you're making and going, okay, so I bought that particular brand. Why did I buy that brand? I hired that particular person. Why did I hire that particular person? Why do I want to hire that person more than I want to hire that person? When there's no clear parallel, one's clearly a merit wise is much stronger than this other person. Why do I want to work with them? What's the truth in it? And if you go looking under the covers a little bit, you may find a little bit of unconscious bias in yourself. It doesn't make you a bad person. It just makes you a person that probably needs to ask a few questions. Because the decisions you make don't just impact your business, they impact the whole world around you as well. Variety, it's the spice of life. Bring a bit more into your marketing and into your business. So what's next? Well, you've got a chance before the end of July now. If you want to have a consult with myself or any of the other fantastic ASBAS Digital Solutions people, your first consult, if you've never had one, is nothing. Zero. You can book it through the Adams system at asbas.com.au. Your second consult, $44. Third consult, $66. But you've got to do this before the end of July because we're running out of time. You can find more at asbas.com.au. You can get in touch with me at any time, Dante at treaty.com.au. Facebook, Instagram, It's what's the other one? LinkedIn. You can stalk me on any of them. I really don't mind. Reach out and say hi. I'm currently on the road in Alice Springs, so my answering time is getting out to about 48 hours now. I'm really sorry about that. I'm trying to get better, but I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining what I think is a very important discussion we had tonight, and I hope that maybe it's inspired you to look a few more times at the decisions you make and wonder if you're making those business decisions for business or because that's what we've always done. I hope to see you in the next one.